Hello, everyone. This is Jacqueline Lowe at Grace That Reigns. Welcome to the Electric Eel Series. We created our summer series of podcasts to give you a spiritual jolt out of your everyday life to help you to focus on the wonder of God and the wonder of the moment during these very trying times. Sometimes wonder needs a jolt. Today we have a new guest. Let me introduce you to Jack Ong. Jack was the ex-chief operating officer at GTNet. It was a Vancouver-based company with deep expertise in web technology. Presently, he is the Director of Strategic Technology at the Catholic Archdiocese of Vancouver. I would have never imagined that Jack would work at the Catholic Archdiocese of Vancouver. Come, listen to his story. It's an amazing story of conversion. So pull up a chair, grab a cup of tea, and stay with us for the next 40 minutes. Well, hello, Jack. Thank you for joining us on our show.
Thank you for having me, Jacqueline.
So, Jack, can you tell me a little bit more about your past, where you came from, what your faith life was, what your family life was like?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Singapore in a kind of nominally Taoist Buddhist background.
Mm-hmm.
So generally very, very far from faith in the Christian sense.
Right.
We visited the temples, the monasteries. All our ancestors were cremated and interred in these mausoleums that were tended by the monks.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that was a big part of our lives growing up. And I loved how reverent things were, and I loved how incense was used liberally. That was one little connection I made when we first attended High Mass in the Catholic Church. It was a cultural affiliation, for sure.
Yes, that's a very good insight. What was life like in Singapore?
Life was, for somebody who grew up there, life seemed very stable, very kind of rigid. There was a certain template of what they expected you to be. Mm-hmm. Singapore being a country with no natural resources, it definitely relied on mercantile kind of industrialism, enterprise to be able to make it. So, yeah, school was always directed towards business and making money and just making something of yourself from nothing. General Singaporean way of looking at life is relatively material.
Right. So what you're saying then is in Singapore, you couldn't just be an artist, but you had to be materially successful.
To be a programmer, a lawyer, a doctor, of course, was much more preferable than trying to make a living as an artist of any kind.
Mm-hmm. And so you lived that life for your childhood years, but then your parents decided that they wanted to move.
Sure, yeah. Thankfully, my dad had a really good job in the telecom industry, and he traveled around the world a bit, and so he got to experience life outside of Singapore, and he was enlightened enough to realize just how oppressive the regime is in Singapore and life is. Mm-hmm. So at the same time that he was doing that, my mother happened to work for the Canadian High Commission in Singapore. So they decided that, it's time to move. It's not conducive to raising a good family. And so they started looking around the world for different places to potentially migrate to, and landed on Vancouver as a good option. Part of the issue was, the conscription.
Oh, yes.
At 18 years of age, you have to go into the Army basically for 2.5 years.
Yes, I think our viewers don't know this, but in Singapore they do. It's mandatory in Singapore.
Yes, for any able-bodied person, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, we moved straight to Vancouver on March 12th, 1988.
So, Jack, you and your family immigrated to Canada, and then you attended high school and then went on to university. What was your big dream, your goal and ambition in this new country?
Well, initially I had this dream. I wanted to go to the London School of Economics, graduate with honors, and come back to Canada and become the chief economist for the Bank of Canada, so that I could tell the Prime Minister of Canada what to do with his economic policies. And so I had this grand plan that unfortunately went off the rails, and I never did get to the London School of Economics, and unfortunately had to alter things because of a bad failed grade in one of my honors calculus classes that I was totally distracted in.
But you were still living the dream of a new immigrant, and you were interested in economic success. And so you continued to work really hard to attain it, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, in pursuit of said wealth. I don't know what that really means, really, but I heard some very wise people separate financial success from success, period. So
right.
I'd rather succeed in life than on the financial, but both is good too. Right. But I was very driven. I had always been driven, and so I started my first company when I was 23, fresh out of university, and thankfully my dad was supportive of it and helped me start this new venture. I was 23 years old at the time. I didn't know anything.
That's very young.
But I was driven. I worked 18 hours a day, and I managed to sell the company when I was 25, and then came back to sold it up to a company out in Ontario.
Right. I was going to mention that.
Went out there for 10 months to try and integrate my company with theirs. We both had kind of nationwide operations, and in some parts of Canada, actually, we were competing with each other. And so there was a need for my team and for their team to be integrated. So I did that. Okay. And then I moved back to Vancouver, and we opened up one of the Vancouver franchises of Death by Chocolate.
When you were younger, going through school, just to step back a little bit, you told me that you even sold cars.
Selling cars was a great thing, and it really kind of took me out of my shell. If you don't speak to people, you don't make any money. So it was a real game changer for me.
So Jack, maybe you were exposed to so many types of employment opportunities so that perhaps you could learn the necessary skills to evangelize your faith. Don't you think?
I don't know about evangelization, but it was definitely a seed for me being able to, I guess, be comfortable speaking to people and asking them for money.
Oh,
I think that was the first time that I'd ever had to, close a deal. And yeah, actually, I'm thankful for this opportunity to kind of retrace those steps, because it brings up, the skills that I banked on today and reminds me of where they originated.
Yeah, life is all integrated, and, the Lord knows our journey, and we'll get back to that. But it's so nice to hear your story. Haven't heard it also. I've known you for so long. So now, Jack, we've just described your growing up years. We've described your goals, your big moves, and your work ethic, and your worldly perspective. But now you're in your 30s, you've just met and married Pollyanna Sher. From this moment on, your life starts to change, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah, Pollyanna, cradle Catholic, born in Hong Kong. We met here in Vancouver at a wedding. She was she was one of the bridesmaids, and I was the MC for the wedding. And so, yeah, we met on our first date. date, she told me that she was discerning the religious life, and I thought, oh, this is going well. And you know, when we did get married, I was really quite far from the church, but you know, she lived a life of witness, and one of the amazing things that she did during the time that we were dating was prison ministry, and out of prison ministry came her one-on-one time with the women at Talitha Kum, a women's halfway house, drug and alcohol addictions.
Right.
And she was doing the things that I thought people ought to do with their lives, which is, you know, giving back to people who are less fortunate, and really, you know, her individual journeys with the women going through addiction recovery was very inspiring to me. She brought me to one of these first-year cakes. So every anniversary of sobriety, you know, for me, any excuse to have cake, but you know, the first year of sobriety and second year, those are big cakes. And so I went to one of these celebrations, and this young lady who was 16 years old stood up and told her story. She had been trafficked basically from Nova Scotia all the way to Vancouver, kind of going through successive pimps and selling her body for drugs after she had been addicted. And
oh, that's awful.
Yeah, so that story really touched me, and so I thought, you know, I want to help in this great cause. I can't journey with the women. That's not possible for me as a man, but I can help on the board side. I can help with the fundraising side. I can help with the governance side of things. So I did that. I did that for probably 5 or 6 years, and but when I was working on the board, my main function actually became the fundraising side. And so we did a lot of that work, and the kind of faithful day in my faith journey happened actually in the course of that work. One of the things that we made a good chunk of money on was a concert. We would hire the barbershop singers and the Gentlemen of Fortune, they called themselves, and they were excellent. They still are, I'm sure, out there somewhere. I haven't seen them for a few years, but the Gentlemen of Fortune would come, and they staged this concert at St. Mary's, and we filled the place. You know, it can take 800, 900 people, and it was a good fundraiser for us. And so that one year, 2009, we're working on that fundraiser, and I had invited all my friends and family, like everybody was coming, and unfortunately on the way to St. Mary's, we were heading east, and we ran into an elderly couple crossing the road. So that was my that was my big turn.
For our listeners, Jack, can you please explain a little bit more about what you meant by you ran into this couple on the road?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we were leaving to go to St. Mary's in order to, I guess, host the evening, and it was a dark, rainy evening. It was November, and we were heading along the road, and this elderly couple kind of dashed across the street trying to get to their car, and we got into this bad accident. We hit them dead on. The gentleman died on the scene, and the lady, she spent 8 months in the hospital rehabilitating. After the accident, I got out of the car. My wife stayed in the car for a while.
Right.
But I got out of the car and walked over to where he was lying on the ground, and yeah, it was it's something kind of you know, being there on the scene when somebody is expiring, and you having been a part of that process, like why he was there.
Wow, Jack, that's tragic. And I can't imagine what was going through your heads. But on the other hand, you also told me that it was the first time you actually ever prayed. Can you tell us more about what happened next?
Yeah. So, yeah, I stood there. I knelt there for a while, and then my wife came out of the car. Several people had gathered around by then, and they were calling 911.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then when my wife came out to see me,
Mm-hmm.
I immediately asked her. I asked if we could pray for the couple,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the first time. And so this was, after me going to church. Well, Sundays used to be G Day for my wife and I. So G for her, for God, and me, the little G for golf.
Oh,
So,
okay.
I would go to church with her. I would sit in the pews. I got to know the responses, so I would say some of the responses. There were things like the creed that I wouldn't say just because I didn't believe yet. So, but that night, immediately after the accident, I asked my wife if she would pray with me, and so that was the first time I prayed to God.
Time stood still, and you will never forget, because it really was sort of a turning point for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, we went through the whole system, the police, the insurance company, the courts, and throughout it all, they said it wasn't my fault, but I mean that was no comfort, really. But I the only place I felt comfortable was in Christ.
What did that mean for you?
When I went to church to kneel in prayer and ask for, I don't know what you would say, wisdom, discernment, peace.
Peace, yes.
That's where I got it, and then you praying over me was another really important piece of my recovery. But I mean, it took 3 years to go through all the kind of fallout process, just the legal process. On the emotional process, I'm still going through all of that, but it was a real turning point, because I think, in my mind anyway, it tore down all the walls of pride that I had put up over my many years.
Right, right, definitely. And I guess as someone who was so successful without having relied on the Lord, there were many walls to be taken down, weren't there?
Yeah, financial success and some nice words of affirmation from other people, and all of a sudden, why do you need God? And not having grown up in that world of Thanksgiving, I think that's the biggest lesson, actually. But
Right.
You really do feel self-reliant, and that's a dangerous place to be.
I know that you and Pollyanna prayed a lot during that time. You prayed for peace, and you prayed for healing for all of you. Was there any one time that you felt that your Christian friends were pressuring you to enter the Catholic Church?
No, it's just I didn't feel any pressure, and the initial introductions that she made to me were Father Vincent Travers, Father Pierre LeBlanc, Sister Catherine Nickerson, and and none of these religious ever gave me any pressure. In fact, they just invited me into their lives and into their homes.
So what you're saying is they led by example.
Yeah.
So I want to ask here, Jack, what happened after the accident?
After the accident, I just became much more open to, well, I was initially just awakened from my torpor, I guess you might want to say. I was just in such a place of, I'm doing so well. I think all Christians, all Catholics are using their faith as a crutch because they can't get through life, like all that stuff kind of just dropped away from me, because very quickly I became I became that person that I thought Catholics were, and I needed a crutch big time. I needed a huge, blanket to cover myself with. And actually, that was an interesting aside, because some people did give me blankets, purple blankets, and there was special significance around that. But I did not appreciate that until that time, and so that was nice. But yeah, after the accident, I became much more open. I became a lot less kind of fenced, and the Word of God started to make sense, and the various readings and the way that people live a religious life started to make sense. And so I started investigating the faith, and I started volunteering and all sorts of crazy things in the Archdiocese of Vancouver. I was testing, in my mind anyway, the people who profess faith, and there were many who really impacted me. Throughout that time when I was kind of poking at people who professed a deep faith, many were truly, how do we say, their faith was truly foundational. It really impacted every part of their lives, and that true witness was very important and very impactful.
And as the person who you are, Jack, I'm not surprised you went straight to the Archdiocese.
I did some work at the parish, at St. Mary's Parish, where I first was introduced to Father Pierre, Father Vincent. But my background being what it is in tech, it only made sense to kind of volunteer my services on the archdiocesan level.
Right. So without the pressure then, it was just easy for you to observe, right?
Yeah, and for a while there, it was kind of cool. I was the only non-Catholic in the room for many of the meetings, and there were always questions from people about, what are you doing here? And I quite enjoyed those. And so it was almost like a call to say, hey, I'm watching, and a lot of other people in my position, a lot of people who are questioning the faith, who are seeking truth, beauty, and goodness, they're looking at you. So you have to be better. And so that was my call to them to really, I don't know if that makes sense, but
you're pushing it.
Sorry?
You're pushing it.
Yeah, I enjoy challenging situations. It's fun, challenging people.
Definitely. So you didn't look back at your life. You were always looking forward. But how did you deal with the difficult thoughts and feelings then that came to your mind?
Well, there were lots of thoughts of escapism. We live in downtown Vancouver, so there are lots of ways to distract yourself from your pain. Everything from pills to worse. Also, at the time, I lived on the 19th floor of an apartment building, and looking downwards, considering taking flight was always an option in terms of getting out of the pain of the present moment. But yeah, thankfully, the call to persevere and fight through it was stronger. So that's why I'm talking to you today.
Thanks, Jack, for being so honest to tell this story. It must have been a hard time for you. But then there's always hope, and we knew that the Lord was changing you, and most of all, changing your heart. In fact, I remember one day we were talking to you on the phone, Bishop and I, and you told us that you had just visited a Trappist monastery. Can you tell us what happened there?
About 8.5 years after the accident, I got an invitation to go hang out with 3 guys that that I have a lot of respect for, Chris, Aiden, and Kevin. And they initially invited me to a weekend in Oregon. We'll start in Cannon Beach and, just kind of have some great food and camaraderie and just be away as 4 guys for a weekend. And I was super enthused by it. And then slowly, so I accepted the invitation, and then slowly it emerged that actually what they were planning was a weekend of silence in a Trappist monastery.
Which they didn't tell you.
Yeah, sorry?
Which they didn't tell you?
They didn't tell me about that initially, and then it just kind of came out, and then it just kept trickling out. Oh yeah, we're going to be in silence, and oh yeah, there's no meat in the diet, and oh yeah. Well, anyway, I'm the kind of guy, if I tell you that we're going to have coffee, we're actually going to have coffee. So since I told the guys that I'm going on this weekend, I wasn't going to back out. So we went down to Our Lady of Guadalupe. It's a beautiful place in Lafayette, Oregon, just outside of Portland.
Right.
1,300 acres. You could walk all day and never see another soul. And so we went down on a Friday in April, and it was gorgeous. It was just absolutely amazing. We did have a little side trip to Cannon Beach where we ran around on the beach and threw a frisbee in 50-mile-an-hour winds, which was kind of fun. But yeah. So during that time at the monastery, we arrived on a Friday, and you enter into silence right away. But that's okay. That's fine. Your body can handle it. Your mind can handle it because it's just slowing down. But then on the Saturday, on the second day, I got into this crazy state of desolation / anxiety / listening too much to yourself. And I was really in somewhat bad shape, actually, by Saturday afternoon. And
prior to this, you hadn't taken any silent time for yourself. Is that correct?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, silence is crazy, right? It's so out there. And so, no, I never... Yeah, before that weekend, I had never spent any time in silence. Even my dreams are animated significantly. I don't have time to myself. So yeah, it was a really alien place to be in, a really alien state to be in. And so Saturday evening vespers, we go into the chapel, and the monks are chanting, and it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. The sunlight streaming in. The trees are rustling. It was beautiful. And then it was there. It was 8.5 years after the accident. I spent all this time kind of investigating the people who profess faith. And I finally kind of got the message very clearly that baptism is the next step. And somehow, the inspiration was there to pick the date of the accident as my baptism date. So now, instead of talking about November 28th as the date of the accident, November 28th is now my baptism date. Yeah.
How did it feel?
It was it was the weirdest thing to me at the time.
Yeah.
Now I'm craving the next time it happens, but
I'm sure you shared this with the boys that brought you down there, and I'm sure they must have been really elated.
Yeah, they were very excited for what had happened, and when we came back to Vancouver, it was just a matter of getting things in place. And
wow.
Bishop Gary agreed to be the main celebrant. Bishop Gary's been a big part of my faith journey as well, traveling around the north when he was the Bishop of Whitehorse.
Right. Bishop Gary is in Victoria now?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, now he's the Bishop of Victoria. It's, but it's been, that was a great evening, my baptism for me.
I was going to say, there were so many people there witnessing this great event, because I think we all looked at it and knew that this was this tremendous grace that you received. And you look so happy, Jack.
I think I was elevating. People are very kind. They took time out of their day and came out to celebrate the fact that I was being received into the church, and for that I'm very thankful.
So you see, friends, Jack's life changed in such a dramatic way because God loves him so much. And even if it took this accident to change him, God knew his path. Keep listening, because Jack's journey with Christ just keeps getting better and better.
Well, I've been baptized for a year and a half, and I've been the first at St. Anthony Padua, probably going on 4 years now. Yeah, so that was a cool thing. After my baptism, I was no longer content to sit in the pews at Mass. So I approached Father Justin and I said, hey, I want to be an altar server. These guys who are, gliding around the altar, doing things at Mass, they seem to be really into their faith, and they really understand the significance of what's happening at Mass. And so I want a piece of that. So I said, Father, I know I'm like 30 some years older than some of these altar servers, but can I be an altar server? And he said, yeah. So I got my own Catholic, and I got a surplice, and then the young guys have been tremendously helpful in teaching an old dog new tricks, and I've been loving being able to serve at Mass. It's been quite the steep learning curve, but wow, I love it.
It's like almost the pinnacle. You're there. You get to be so close to the Holy Eucharist. It's just uplifting. It's like you wouldn't have thought about this 20 years ago. What do your parents think of this?
My parents are fantastic in the sense they've always been super open. When I told them I'm going to be Catholic, it was never anything but, that's great. I'm glad you found that. They do come once in a while to church with me, but typically only for more special events, like when we renewed our wedding vows, for example. But my whole family was there at my baptism, and I don't know how to do the next thing of evangelization with them. I have a friend who started Family Alpha with their little immediate group, and that could be something that I bring up with my family. I don't know. It's a pretty scary thought, but maybe that's where God's leading us. One of those people that I had mentioned earlier who kind of questioned my wife and her decision to marry a non-Catholic, he took it upon himself to invite me to an Alpha series, going on 12 years ago. And back then it was just Nicky Gumbel on the screen talking to you, and the guy was strangely compelling. Like I could sit there for hours and hours just listening to him talk.
Could you explain a little bit to our friends and explain what Alpha is? Maybe give us a sentence or two?
Yeah, sure. So Alpha is a program designed as an introduction to Christianity. It's 12 weeks. Usually you meet for a meal and a video, and then you get into a small group for discussion afterwards. It's been a very successful program. I highly recommend it. Being run out of Holy Trinity Brompton in England, and when I first went through Alpha, I told Bishop Gary, this is like Christianity light. I don't want the meat and potatoes of Catholicism. But since then, Alpha's very different today than it was 12 years ago. And we are now in our 9th season of Alpha at St. Anthony's, and this is our first season, of course, fully online. So there isn't even the temptation of good food to get people to come in the door to talk about Jesus. So it's been a learning experience this season at St. Anthony's, but yeah, this my ninth season as part of the Alpha team, and
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, initially I was exposed to Alpha more than 12 years ago.
That's
It's
a
been a
long
great
time.
journey.
Yes. Jack, this has been a wonderful time just sitting with you and learning about your story all over again. I've learned great things about you now, and I wondered if you had any advice to offer.
Yeah, my most fervent prayer for people who are seeking the faith is for them to not have to go through any kind of trauma in order to tear down the walls of, I guess, protection slash rationalism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah, there's no, was it G.K. Chesterton who said, there's no faith, there's no understanding without faith.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
you really, you can try to understand certain passages in the Bible, certain things that Jesus said, but if you're just looking at them from, kind of, we as humans, we as simple humans, we we don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
And, as much as I thought that I had a certain mental capacity, until I let go of those hard-headed, objections,
Mm-hmm.
there was there was no reconciliation. There was no coming to faith from my position, from where I was back then.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately for me, it took a jolt. It took a crazy event that, and my wife said this previously, is that I am a good driver, and I take a lot of pride in being a good driver, and, looking ahead and making sure that, I think a couple of steps ahead and be proactive about things. But that accident entirely tore me apart because I took so much pride in that particular skill. So,
Mm-hmm.
if you're an engineer, or if you're a doctor, or if you're, somebody who trades on their intelligence and abilities to make a living and to, make their mark in the world, it's really hard to get off of that position and be humble enough and then have the ability to trust in the Lord.
I feel that you're more connected to your heart. You're connected more to your emotions, and I think that's what the Holy Spirit does with us. And
Oh, thank you. I'm not sure, but I try. We do absolutely what we can to invite Jesus into our lives.
how would you like to continue to serve the Lord?
If I can provide some new directions or new ways of looking at things because of my experience, then I think that would be a really good use of my time. I think your life and Bishop Gilmore's life would be very good examples to model one's own prayer life on. But for me, it's a matter of recentering.
Mm-hmm.
I find myself very, very quickly going back to the old ways of judgment and measurement.
Mm-hmm. Those are the
And,
temptations that will always be there. But, with your newfound family, you know that you'll be receiving much more than just a pat in the back. The prayer is going to be so powerful for you from now on. So, and intercessory prayer. So it's wonderful. Any last word, Jack?
No, I mean, for everyone who is listening, is taking the time to listen to this, I think prayers for everybody. I hope you pray for us all, and it's a beautiful life, and it's a beautiful faith, and may we be able to tell more about it.
Well, Jack, Bishop Gilmore and I can't wait to follow you into the future. There's so much ahead of you. And we want to thank you again for being honest and being open about the experience you went through, and mostly for assuring our visitors and our listeners and letting them believe that God truly has our back. Thank you so much. This is Jacqueline Lowe at Grace That Reigns, and this is the Electric Eel Series. We hope you join us next week. We are at www.gracethatreigns.com. If you've liked what you've heard, please share our commitment to renewing your wonder.